Scary telling.
Before my parents left town for the weekend, they tucked me in, locked my bedroom door, and told me that there was nothing to be afraid of. The monsters had no way of getting inside the house. I always found their assurances a bit hollow. My imagination was too active to ignore the possibility of things lurking in the darkness. But still, I managed to fall asleep eventually. It was the middle of the night when I was woken up by a sound. At first, I wasn't sure what it was, but then I realized it was laughter. The laughter was coming from inside the closet. I sat up in bed and tried to listen more closely. Yes, it was definitely laughter, a low chuckle that seemed to be coming from a person's throat. Fear shot through me, and I started to shake. I had to be imagining it, I told myself, but the laughter continued. It was too real to be just my imagination. I tried to think of what to do. I couldn't call my parents, they were miles away. I couldn't run out of the room, the laughter was coming from the closet, and I didn't want to go near it. I was trapped, and the laughter continued. I couldn't stay frozen in my bed forever, so I mustered up the courage to get out of bed and take a closer look at the closet. I approached it slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached out to open the door, the laughter abruptly stopped. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just forget about it and go back to bed, but curiosity got the better of me. I swung the door open. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Just clothes hanging on hangers and shoes stacked neatly on the floor. But then, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a figure standing in the corner. It was tall and thin, with long arms and legs that seemed to be made of sticks. Its face was hidden in the shadows, but I could see its glowing eyes staring at me. I screamed and stumbled back, tripping over my own feet and falling onto the bed. I scrambled back up, expecting the creature to come out of the closet and attack me, but it didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving the closet. As I reached the door, the laughter started again. It was a high-pitched, maniacal cackle that chilled me to the bone. I ran out of the room and locked the door behind me, hoping that whatever was in the closet would stay there. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I lay in bed, shaking with fear, listening to the laughter coming from the other side of the door. It didn't stop until morning. The next day, I tried to convince myself that it was just a nightmare. I even went to the closet to investigate, but I found nothing out of the ordinary. The clothes and shoes were in the same place as before, and there was no sign of the creature I had seen the night before. But as soon as the sun set and darkness fell again, I heard the laughter coming from the closet once more. This time, it was joined by a scratching sound, like something was trying to get out. I was too afraid to go near the door, but I knew that whatever was in there was not going to stay put for long. I spent the night in a state of constant fear, listening to the laughter and scratching until it finally stopped around dawn. I didn't dare leave my room, even in daylight. I was too scared to face whatever was waiting for me outside the door. By the time my parents came home, I was a nervous wreck. I told them everything that had happened, but they didn't believe me. They just thought I had had a bad dream and didn't want to admit it. They even opened the closet to show me that there was nothing inside. But as soon as they did, the laughter started again. This time, they heard it too. They rushed out of the room, telling me to stay put while they called the police. I could hear them shouting into the phone, their voices frantic and panicked. But then, suddenly, the laughter stopped. And when my parents returned to the room, they found nothing out of the ordinary. The closet was empty, and there was no sign of any creature or monster. but I knew what I had heard. And even though I never saw the creature again, I knew that it was still out there, waiting for me to let my guard down. And I knew that I would never feel safe again, not as long as the laughter from the closet echoed in my ears. After that night, my parents didn't leave me alone in the house anymore. They hired a babysitter whenever they went out, and they even had me sleep in their bedroom for a while. But no matter how much they tried to protect me, I knew that I was never truly safe. The creature in the closet became an obsession for me. I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I was constantly on edge, waiting for it to come back. I started to do research online, trying to find any information I could about monsters or creatures that laughed in closets. But all I found were stories and legends, nothing that seemed to match what I had experienced. One day, I stumbled upon a website that claimed to offer supernatural protection. They had all kinds of talismans, spells, and potions that were supposed to keep monsters and ghosts away. It all seemed too good to be true, but I was desperate for any kind of solution. I ordered a package from the website, a set of crystals and herbs that were supposed to create a protective barrier around me. The instructions said that I had to burn the herbs and sprinkle the crystals around my room before I went to bed. It sounded silly, but I was willing to try anything. That night, I followed the instructions carefully. I burned the herbs and scattered the crystals around my room. And for the first time in months, I slept through the night without any disturbances. I was overjoyed. I finally had a way to protect myself from the creature in the closet. I continued to use the crystals and herbs every night, and they seemed to be working. The laughter and scratching never returned. But then, one night, I forgot to use them. I had been out late with friends and was too tired to remember. I crawled into bed and fell asleep almost immediately. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of the closet door creaking open. The laughter started again, louder than ever before. And this time, it wasn't just coming from the closet. It was coming from all around me. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I could see shadows moving in the corners of the room, and I knew that the creature was there with me. I scrambled for the crystals and herbs, hoping that it wasn't too late. But it was. The creature was already inside the protective barrier, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The last thing I remember is the sound of its laughter echoing in my ears as it dragged me into the darkness. I woke up in a cold, damp room. The walls were made of stone, and the only light came from a small candle in the corner. I tried to move, but my arms and legs were bound tightly with ropes. Panic set in as I realized that I had been kidnapped. I struggled against the ropes, trying to break free, but they were too tight. I screamed for help, but my voice was hoarse from screaming during my abduction. I heard footsteps approaching, and a figure appeared in the doorway. It was the creature from my closet, but now that I saw it in the light, I realized that it wasn't a monster at all. It was a man, dressed in ragged clothing, with wild hair and a manic look in his eyes. He approached me slowly, holding a knife in his hand. I screamed again, but he just laughed. "Don't worry, little one," he said. "I won't hurt you, yet." I begged him to let me go, but he just chuckled. "You should be honored," he said. "You're going to be my new plaything. I've been looking for someone to entertain me for a while now, and you'll do just fine." My stomach turned as he reached for me with his knife. I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst, but then I heard a loud crash and a shout from outside the room. The man hesitated for a moment, and that was all I needed. I wriggled my hands free from the ropes and ran towards the door. But before I could reach it, the man grabbed me from behind and pulled me back. We struggled for a moment, but then there was another crash, and the door burst open. A group of people rushed into the room, led by a woman with a stern expression and a badge on her chest. "Police," she shouted. "Put your hands up." The man hesitated, but then he lunged for the knife. The police officers didn't hesitate. They tackled him to the ground and handcuffed him, dragging him out of the room. I was shaking with fear and relief. The police officers untied me and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. They asked me if I was okay, if I needed any medical attention, but all I could do was nod and sob. It turned out that the man had been a serial kidnapper, luring children into his home with promises of toys and candy. He had been evading the police for years, moving from town to town and never leaving a trace. But they had finally caught him, thanks to a tip from a concerned neighbor. I was lucky to have escaped with my life. But the memory of that laughter, of being trapped in that cold, dark room, haunted me for years to come. After that night, I had trouble sleeping. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind made me jump. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that the man would come back for me. But as time went on, the fear subsided. I started to feel safe again, especially after my parents installed an alarm system and reinforced the locks on all the doors and windows. Years went by, and I eventually moved out of my parents' house and started my own life. I rarely thought about that night anymore until one day, I received a letter in the mail. It was a simple white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in a spidery, slanted handwriting. "I remember you. You were my favorite." I froze when I read those words. My heart raced as I tried to think of who could have sent it. Was it the man who had kidnapped me all those years ago? Had he escaped from prison and was now coming after me? I called the police, and they told me to come in and file a report. They took the letter and promised to investigate, but I knew deep down that there was little they could do. Without a return address, there was no way to trace the letter's origin. For weeks, I was on edge. Every time my phone rang, I was afraid it would be the man on the other end. Every time I walked down the street, I felt eyes on me, watching my every move. But nothing ever happened. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. Eventually, I started to relax again, thinking that maybe the letter had just been a sick prank. But then, one night, I woke up to the sound of laughter. It was the same high-pitched, maniacal laughter that had haunted me as a child. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, listening for any other sounds. But there was nothing, just the soft rustle of the wind outside. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that it was just my imagination. But then I heard it again, louder this time, coming from somewhere in my apartment. I got out of bed and walked cautiously towards my closet. I knew that it was foolish, that there was no way anyone could be inside, but I had to check. I opened the door, and at first, I saw nothing. But then, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. I screamed and stumbled backwards, tripping over a pile of clothes and falling to the ground. When I looked up again, the eyes were gone. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. In fact, I didn't sleep well for weeks after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes staring back at me. And then, one day, I woke up to find another letter on my doorstep. It was the same white envelope as before, with no return address. I opened it with shaking hands, half afraid of what I might find inside. The letter was short and to the point. "I'm still here." My heart raced as I read those words. It was the same slanted handwriting as before, and I knew immediately that it was from the man who had kidnapped me as a child. I called the police again, but they told me the same thing as before. Without a return address, there was little they could do. They promised to keep an eye on my building, but I knew that it wasn't enough. I started to carry pepper spray with me wherever I went, and I even took a self-defense class. But no matter how prepared I thought I was, I still felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the man to strike again. And then, one night, I came home to find my apartment in disarray. Drawers had been pulled out of their sockets, clothes were strewn across the floor, and my furniture had been overturned. But what scared me the most was the note on my kitchen counter. It was written in the same slanted handwriting as before, and it read, "I'm getting closer." I knew then that I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend, but even there, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Days turned into weeks, and I started to think that maybe the man had given up. Maybe he had moved on to someone else. But then, one night, I woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was him. The man who had kidnapped me as a child. He was older now, his hair graying at the temples, but his eyes were still as cold and calculating as I remembered. For a moment, I froze, too afraid to move. But then I remembered the pepper spray in my bedside table, and I lunged for it. I sprayed him in the face, and he stumbled backwards, screaming and cursing. I scrambled out of bed and ran for the door, but he grabbed me by the ankle and pulled me back. We struggled for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. I clawed at his face and kicked him in the stomach, but he was too strong. Just when I thought all hope was lost, there was a pounding at the door. It was the police, responding to a noise complaint from the neighbors. The man panicked and let go of me, running towards the window. He smashed through the glass and jumped out, disappearing into the night. The police never caught him, but I knew that I was lucky to be alive. And even now, years later, I still sleep with one eye open, afraid that he'll come back for me again.